often hidden under the label of dark psychology. These are not techniques anyone proudly admits to using. In fact, most women would strongly prefer that you never learn them, because they expose how attention is truly captured, often without conscious awareness, without intention, and sometimes even against resistance. These methods are not loud. They do not announce themselves. They do not operate on logic or reason. They work quietly beneath awareness, directly on instinct. Once you understand them, being ignored stops being a possibility. Before anything else, there is one fundamental truth you must understand. The human mind was never designed to defend itself against someone who understands exactly how subconscious pressure points work. Most people live in reaction. They guess intentions. They seek reassurance. They explain themselves too much. They chase validation. They compare themselves constantly. But the person who understands subconscious triggers, the mechanisms that function below language and conscious thought, becomes a psychological center of gravity. Others begin adjusting around them without fully understanding why. When it comes to women, this effect becomes even more visible. A woman's attention is not given freely. It is filtered. It is selective. It is granted only to those who activate a precise combination of curiosity, emotional tension, charm, and uncertainty. You can be attractive. You can be intelligent. You can be physically strong. None of that guarantees fascination. But when you learn to influence instinct instead of logic, you become unforgettable. Even when she wishes she could ignore you. Everything begins with subtly altering her emotional environment. This is not about dominance displays or exaggerated confidence. It is about making reality feel slightly more intense the moment you enter it. The first unethical mechanism. The creation of micro-uncertainty. Small emotional disturbances. Tiny disruptions in mental comfort. These are the elements that pull her thoughts back to you repeatedly. Women do not become addicted to certainty. They become addicted to unresolved space. Predictable answers kill attraction. Complete transparency kills tension. But when you offer partial responses, ambiguous statements, pauses that linger a second too long, compliments that feel layered rather than pure, her mind refuses to settle. She tries to understand you, and every attempt pulls her deeper. Uncertainty is not chaos. It is an elegant psychological leash. The second mechanism, emotional alternation. Most men are painfully linear, stable, consistent, predictable. They believe stability creates attraction. And it does, but only comfort, never dominance. The human nervous system craves variation. Emotional highs and lows, peaks and drops. When you alternate warmth with distance, intensity with silence, interest with restraint, you keep her emotional system activated. A delayed reply, an unexpected withdrawal, a sudden emotional coolness where warmth was expected. Each shift triggers a chemical response that ties her emotional state to your behavior. Without realizing it, she starts tracking you, reading you, adjusting to you. Emotional dependence forms quietly. The third mechanism, destabilizing the ego without visible attack. Nothing direct. Nothing insulting. That would destroy the effect. Instead, you introduce subtle observations that create internal doubt. You seem confident, but sometimes it feels like something weighs on you. You get attention easily, but I wonder if you notice who's actually watching. These comments bypass defenses. They don't attack identity. They question perception. She begins seeing herself through your eyes. And the moment that happens, influence is already established. The fourth mechanism, creating psychological presence in absence. This is where suggestion replaces declaration. You do not state desires. You imply them. You do not express interest clearly. You plant emotional imagery that activates later. If I said what crossed my mind today, you probably wouldn't believe me. Then you change the subject. Her imagination does the rest. You become a lingering question, a mental echo, a presence that survives distance. The fifth mechanism, becoming something that must be earned. What arrives easily is dismissed. What remains partially unreachable becomes a mission. You allow brief glimpses of depth, then withdraw them. Emotional layers appear and disappear. She begins trying to reach you, to understand you, to unlock something she believes exists just beneath the surface. The pursuit consumes energy because the door was never closed, only never fully opened. The sixth mechanism, veiled comparison and invisible competition. This tactic is never obvious, never direct, never aggressive. If it is, it fails. Instead, it enters quietly and settles deep. A single sentence is enough. There's something about you that reminds me of someone I once respected a lot. Nothing more. No explanation. No follow-up. Her mind immediately activates comparison mode. Who was that person? Why were they admired? What qualities did they have? And most importantly, how close am I to that standard? Competition does not need a visible rival. An invisible benchmark is far more powerful. She begins adjusting, refining, performing without you ever asking. Effort increases. And effort is the birthplace of attachment. The seventh mechanism, the illusion of being deeply seen. This is the most dangerous of all. You notice what others miss. You articulate feelings she never said aloud. You interpret her silences accurately. You reference patterns she didn't realize were visible. You hide more than people think. You're not as effortless as you pretend to be. These statements don't accuse. They reveal. And when someone feels recognized at the level of identity, the bond goes beyond attraction, beyond desire, beyond status. Most people crave to be noticed. Very few crave to be understood. And almost no one forgets the person who made them feel exposed in a quiet, intimate way. When these mechanisms combine, fascination becomes fixation. True power begins when predictability disappears. Predictable men are archived. Unpredictable men remain active in memory. To be unforgettable, you must exist between safety and threat, between warmth and unease, between closeness and distance. You cannot be fully available, but you can never be fully absent. When she leans in emotionally, something in you pulls back. Not coldly, quietly, as if there is a boundary she hasn't earned access to yet. When she creates distance, you reappear just enough to remind her you exist. This emotional oscillation forms a pendulum, and the human mind becomes obsessed with unresolved motion. Emotional suggestion replaces emotional demand. You never tell her what to feel. You create the environment where certain emotions grow naturally. You lower your voice when she's close. You hold eye contact slightly longer than expected. You pause before responding as if considering something important. And just as she begins to feel chosen, you withdraw. Not abruptly, not cruelly, but with the calm of someone processing something internal. She interprets depth, complexity, inner struggle, something rare, something she wants to access, maybe even heal. Intermittent validation enters quietly. You never reward consistently. Consistency creates safety. Safety kills intensity. Instead, you validate selectively. A look that lingers. A compliment that feels unusually precise. A short message that carries weight beyond its words. Then distance. Neutrality. Silence. She wonders what changed. If she did something wrong. If she should try again. The search for validation becomes addictive. And slowly, you become the primary source of emotional reinforcement without ever asking to be. But dominance is never obvious control. The highest form of dominance is making her believe she is winning you. You reveal vulnerability but only fragments. Never real weakness. Only controlled openings. Sometimes I feel disconnected but I don't really know why. That single sentence activates a powerful instinct. The desire to be the exception. To be the one who understands. To be the one who reaches where others cannot. Strength mixed with partial openness creates a complex image. You are not closed. But you are not accessible either. Each time you open emotionally and then close again, she experiences loss. And humans pursue what feels lost. Ownership of attention is never about presence. It is about mental occupation. Your scent becomes a memory. Your tone becomes a reference. Your silence becomes meaning. She thinks of you when you're not there. That is when attention is truly owned. Strategic unpredictability completes the structure. Sometimes you reply instantly. Sometimes you disappear. Sometimes you engage deeply. Sometimes you detach without explanation. Each absence becomes emotional debt. Each return becomes reward. Her mind starts decoding everything you do as signal. Pauses carry meaning.
Silence carry intention.
Small gestures feel symbolic. At that point, attention is no longer casual. It is captive. Eventually, she begins feeling challenged on levels she cannot explain. You are immune to tactics that work on others. Compliments don't sway you. Distance doesn't threaten you. Charm doesn't destabilize you. That immunity provokes effort. Effort deepens attachment. Then comes projection. You hint, not confirm, that you notice what she hides. Sometimes I notice things people don't mean to show. You never explain what you saw. You leave the space open. A half-open door. Half-open doors are irresistible. You become a distorted mirror. You don't reflect truth. You selectively shape perception. Confidence meets doubt. Insecurity meets partial approval. Her sense of self begins reorganizing around your reactions. Silence becomes a weapon. Silence is never empty. It expands meaning. When you stay quiet after something emotional, she fills the space with explanations, justifications, confessions. Anxiety forms. Anxiety becomes attention. Attention becomes attachment. And when she finally confronts you, when she asks what's happening, you remain calm, observant, grounded. You try to control what you feel. That doesn't really work with me, does it? That sentence dismantles defenses. Exposure and fascination merge. Soon she reacts before thinking. Her body responds before intention. She tries to deny it. Denial signals entrapment. Identity attachment. When attraction becomes self-definition. At a certain point, attraction quietly mutates into something far more dangerous. She no longer reacts to you as a man. She reacts to you as a reference point. This is the moment identity attachment begins. Identity attachment happens when a person stops asking, "What do I feel about him?" and starts asking, "What does this say about me?" You never announce this shift. You allow it to happen naturally by becoming emotionally non-reactive in moments where reaction is expected. When she seeks enthusiasm, you offer calm. When she expects reassurance, you offer observation. When she looks for praise, you offer neutral acknowledgement. This absence of emotional mirroring destabilizes her internal calibration. She can no longer read herself clearly through your responses. So she begins adjusting herself to see what version of her unlocks something in you. That adjustment is not attraction. That adjustment is psychological investment. The silent inversion of emotional control. Most men give women emotional certainty too early. They explain intentions. They clarify feelings. They reassure insecurities. That creates safety, but it also eliminates leverage. You do the opposite. You allow ambiguity to remain. You let questions exist without answers. You let emotional tension breathe. This forces her mind to stay engaged. The brain hates unresolved patterns. When it cannot complete a loop, it replays it. Again and again. She starts replaying conversations, reinterpreting tone, reanalyzing pauses. Not because she wants to, but because her nervous system is searching for coherence. Psychological mirroring done inversely. Most people mirror directly. You mirror inversely. When she shows confidence, you become unreadable. When she shows insecurity, you become grounded and steady. When she pulls away, you show subtle awareness. When she leans in, you reduce emotional accessibility. This inversion scrambles expectation. She cannot predict which version of herself activates which version of you. So she experiments. She tests. She adjusts. Each adjustment is another layer of emotional commitment. Controlled vulnerability, the illusion of depth. You never reveal weakness. You reveal access. You share thoughts that feel personal but never destabilizing. Sometimes I feel disconnected from everything, but I've learned not to chase explanations. That sentence does several things at once. It signals depth. It signals emotional restraint. It signals something unresolved. Most importantly, it signals that you are not asking to be saved. This activates a powerful internal conflict in her. The desire to reach you collides with the realization that you don't need her to. That contradiction creates obsession. Scarcity without cruelty. You never withdraw emotionally with hostility. You withdraw with purpose. You disappear calmly. You return without apology. You resume connection without explanation. This teaches her nervous system something critical. Your presence is valuable, temporary, and never guaranteed. The mind does not handle meaningful absence well. It searches. It fills gaps. It imagines. And imagination is far more powerful than reality. The creation of emotional symbols. At this stage, small details begin carrying weight. A word you repeat occasionally. A specific tone. A brief smile. A pause before responding. These become internal anchors. Later, when she hears that word elsewhere, she thinks of you. When she notices that tone in another man, it feels empty. When someone else smiles at her, it doesn't register. You have entered her emotional memory, not as an event but as a pattern. Emotional contrast. The addiction loop. One day you are warmth. The next distance. One interaction feels intimate. The next feels restrained. This contrast releases emotional adrenaline. The same chemical loop involved in gambling and intermittent reward. She never knows which version of you she will encounter. And uncertainty sustains attention far longer than certainty ever could. She begins confusing emotional intensity with emotional depth. Discomfort starts feeling meaningful. Tension starts feeling important. The fear of loss without ownership. You never say you might leave. You live like someone whose life is moving forward regardless. Plans exist beyond her. Focus exists beyond her. Your inner world is self-contained. This creates a powerful sensation. She feels she could lose you without ever fully having you. That fear reorganizes priorities. She starts thinking about you more. She checks her phone more. She wonders where she stands. And without realizing it, she begins placing you above things she once considered essential. Asymmetrical investment. Here is where imbalance solidifies. She invests emotionally. You remain composed. She analyzes. You observe. She seeks clarity. You allow mystery. This asymmetry creates authority without force. Power without command. You are not chasing her. She is orbiting you. When resistance appears, eventually she senses something is wrong. She tries to regain control. She distances herself. She rationalizes. But each attempt only sharpens the emotional imprint. When she pulls away, you appear briefly, not intensely, just enough. A sentence. A look. An acknowledgement. Just enough to reopen the loop. She feels relief. Then confusion. Then renewed attachment. The internal shift. At this stage, she stops asking why you affect her. Instead, she asks, why am I reacting this way? That question is the threshold. Once crossed, attraction becomes identity involvement. She is no longer attached to you. She is attached to what you awaken inside her. Emotional addiction. When attention becomes conditioning. At this stage, attraction has already crossed into dependency. Not visible. Not dramatic. But quietly installed. What now takes place is not romance. It is conditioning. Most people believe emotional bonds form through constant affection. They are wrong. The strongest bonds form through intermittent reinforcement, the same psychological mechanism behind gambling, compulsive checking, and behavioral addiction. You never reward consistently. You reward unpredictably. Sometimes you offer full presence, focused, attentive, almost intimate. Other times you offer nothing. No explanation, no reassurance, no emotional feedback. Her nervous system begins associating emotional relief with your return. Relief is addictive. Anticipation is addictive. Uncertainty is addictive. And together they form a closed loop. The reinforcement cycle. The cycle is simple but devastating. Connection. Withdrawal. Emotional discomfort. Return. Relief. Her brain learns something dangerous. You are the solution to the discomfort you created. This does not register consciously. It installs itself neurologically. She begins checking messages more often, replaying interactions, waiting. Expectation becomes a quiet poison. Time as a psychological weapon. You never explicitly control time. You let time work for you. When she feels confident, you delay. When she feels uncertain, you respond. Slow replies during emotional openness. Quick replies during emotional withdrawal. This reorganizes her internal rhythm. She begins adjusting her behavior based on when she believes you will respond. She writes messages carefully, deletes drafts, rewrites. Time stops being neutral. It becomes emotionally charged. Silence as expansion, not absence. Silence does not remove meaning. It multiplies it. When you remain silent after an emotional moment, Her mind expands the space. She fills it with interpretation, justification, self-questioning. Did I say too much? Did I misread something? Did he notice that? Silence creates anxiety. Anxiety sharpens focus. Focus strengthens attachment. Emotional coolness is dominance. You never react with intensity when intensity is expected. When she expresses emotion, you remain composed. When she seeks reassurance, you offer observation. When she expects closeness, you maintain emotional posture. This does not feel like rejection. Feels like depth. She assumes you are processing something complex, something internal, something she cannot access yet. That assumption keeps her invested. Conditional intimacy. You do not deny intimacy. You ration it. Moments of closeness feel rare, focused, almost sacred. And just as she begins to settle into that closeness, you withdraw. Not dramatically, not coldly, simply unavailable. The nervous system panics at the loss of something meaningful. And panic creates urgency, the illusion of emotional exclusivity. You never say she is special. You behave as if connection is rare. You imply, not state, that few people reach you. That access is selective. That emotional proximity is earned. She begins believing she is touching something few others ever have. This belief is more powerful than any compliment. People do irrational things for what they believe is rare. The erosion of external influence. Slowly, almost invisibly, she begins filtering her world through you. Advice from friends feels irrelevant. Warnings feel exaggerated. Discomfort feels justified. She defends you internally, rationalizes your distance, explains away inconsistencies. This is not loyalty. This is cognitive alignment. Once someone begins protecting the source of their emotional discomfort, detachment becomes extremely difficult. Emotional projection deepens. She begins projecting meaning onto everything you do. A delayed reply becomes a test. A short message becomes intimacy. A neutral tone becomes emotional distance. Reality blurs. Interpretation dominates. She stops reacting to facts. She reacts to perceived intent. When the body responds before the mind, at this point the psychological grip is no longer theoretical. Her body reacts automatically. Heart rate changes when you appear. Breathing shifts. Voice alters. Hands become restless. These responses happen before conscious thought. She feels unsettled and attracted, nervous and drawn, aware something is wrong, yet unable to disengage. Resistance strengthens the loop. Eventually she tries to fight it. She distances herself, becomes colder, acts indifferent. But resistance reinforces attachment. The mind interprets resistance as significance. If this wasn't important, I wouldn't need to fight it. Each attempt to pull away increases internal tension. Each tension seeks release. And the release still points back to you. Emotional reliance without request. You never ask her to need you. You never demand attention. She gives it automatically. You have become the emotional reference point, the baseline, the regulator. When she feels off, she thinks of you. When she feels stable, she checks for you. You are no longer part of her emotional life. You are the axis of it. Absence as dominance. When presence becomes conditional. At this stage, emotional attachment is no longer fragile. It is structured. What now defines power is not what you do, but when you are not there. Most people fear absence. They try to compensate for it. They explain it. They apologize for it. That instinct destroys leverage. You do the opposite. You allow absence to exist without justification. You leave conversations unfinished. You exit moments without closure. You step away without emotional noise. This teaches her something critical. Your presence is not guaranteed. The mind reacts strongly to meaningful absence. It searches for reasons. It fills space with narratives. It replays interactions, scanning for errors. Absence becomes pressure. Priority inversion. You never tell her to prioritize you. You simply live as if you already have priorities beyond her. Your focus is elsewhere. Your time is occupied. Your attention is selective. She begins feeling that access to you is limited, and therefore valuable. Without realizing it, she starts reorganizing her life around moments where you might appear. Plans shift. Attention redirects. Availability increases. This is not sacrifice. It is reorientation. She believes she is choosing. In reality, she is adapting. Emotional scarcity. Scarcity does not mean coldness. It means selectivity. When you are present, you are fully present. Focused. Observant. Calm. But that presence never lasts too long. Just as comfort begins forming, you leave. The contrast sharpens impact. Intensity condenses. Memory strengthens. The mind values what feels temporary far more than what feels stable. The illusion of conditional connection. You never state conditions. You imply them through behavior. When she behaves in certain ways, you are warmer. When she doesn't, you remain neutral. No punishment. No reward. Just variation. Her nervous system begins mapping cause and effect. She adjusts behavior unconsciously. Not to please you, but to restore emotional equilibrium. This is conditioning without command. Hope without promise. You never promise a future. You imply possibility. Some connections change things. Certain people leave marks. These statements create emotional direction without commitment. Hope becomes internal, self-generated, self-sustained, and hope is far more addictive than certainty. The brain does not distinguish clearly between imagined futures and real ones. Emotional rehearsal makes possibility feel real. She begins imagining moments that never happened, conversations that never occurred, outcomes that were never offered. And imagination deepens investment. Emotional ambiguity as a stabilizer. You never clarify where she stands. You allow uncertainty to remain. When she seeks definition, you deflect gently. When she asks directly, you respond indirectly. I don't label things easily. I prefer to see how things unfold. This prevents resolution. Resolution ends tension. Tension sustains attachment. Psychological imbalance solidifies. At this stage, investment is asymmetrical. She thinks more, feels more, questions more. You remain composed, centered, unrushed. This imbalance creates authority without assertion. You are not demanding control. You are embodying it. When she tests boundaries, eventually she challenges the dynamic. She withdraws attention. She delays responses. She mirrors your absence. But the difference is subtle and crucial. Your absence feels natural. Hers feels forced. She is acting. You are being. The nervous system recognizes this difference. Her withdrawal creates discomfort. Yours creates intrigue. Strategic reappearance. When emotional tension peaks, you return briefly. Not dramatically. Not intensely. A message. A comment. A look. Just enough to release pressure. Relief floods in. Attachment deepens. The cycle resets. Emotional centralization. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, her emotional world narrows. Other interactions feel muted. Other men feel predictable. Other connections feel shallow. You are not better. You are unresolved. And unresolved stimuli dominate attention. The silent hierarchy. Without discussion, a hierarchy forms. Your mood affects hers. Your presence regulates her. Your absence destabilizes her. This is not because you demanded importance. It is because you became the emotional reference point. She begins measuring experiences against how they feel compared to you. Nothing matches. Nothing satisfies. Nothing replaces. The paradox of distance. The closer she gets emotionally, the more distance you maintain. Not rejection. Not detachment. Perspective. This distance reinforces value. What is not fully accessible feels elevated. She does not feel pushed away. She feels challenged. And challenge sustains pursuit. When attachment becomes internal. At this point, she no longer needs interaction to feel connected. She thinks about you alone. Replays memories alone. Feels reactions alone. You exist internally. That is dominance without presence. Influence without effort. And the most dangerous form of control is the one that no longer requires action. Emotional ambiguity. When confusion becomes attachment. At this stage, clarity would be dangerous. Clarity would end the tension. And tension is the engine that keeps everything alive. So instead of offering answers, you cultivate ambiguity. You never say what this connection is. You never say what it is becoming. You never say where it is going. You allow it to exist in a permanent state of almost defined, almost intimate, almost real. This almost is far more powerful than certainty. The human mind cannot tolerate undefined emotional states. When it doesn't know what something is, it keeps engaging with it, trying to stabilize it. And the more it tries, the deeper it sinks. False hope without deception. You never lie. You never promise. You never exaggerate. You simply allow interpretation. Statements like, some people change you without trying. Certain connections don't fit into normal categories. Not everything meaningful has to be explained immediately. These sentences do not commit you to anything, but they give her mind direction. And direction is all imagination needs to build a future. Hope does not require guarantees. It only requires possibility. Once hope exists, logic becomes optional. The imagined future effect. Her mind begins projecting forward. She imagines moments, conversations, situations that have not happened. She imagines how you would react, what you would say, how things could be. The brain rehearses these imagined futures emotionally. And emotion does not distinguish between rehearsal and reality. Each imagined scenario feels real. Each imagined bond strengthens attachment. She is no longer responding only to you. She is responding to a version of the future she built around you. Ambiguity as emotional glue. Whenever she tries to define things, you soften the moment. You don't shut her down. You don't pull away aggressively. You redirect. I don't like forcing meaning onto things. I think some connections reveal themselves slowly. This makes uncertainty feel intentional rather than accidental. She assumes depth, patience, emotional intelligence. She waits. Waiting strengthens investment. Idealization through distance. Because you are never fully accessible, she begins idealizing. Your silence becomes thoughtfulness. Your distance becomes complexity. Your restraint becomes depth. Flaws blur. Contradictions soften. She fills gaps with imagination. And imagination always paints in flattering colors. The version of you in her mind becomes cleaner, deeper, more refined than any real person could be. And that version is impossible to compete with. Projection intensifies. She starts projecting parts of herself onto you. Her hopes. Her fears. Her unmet needs. She believes you understand her not because you said so, but because she feels understood around you. That feeling is enough. She begins assuming alignment. Shared values. Shared emotional language. Even when none was explicitly confirmed. Emotional mirroring collapse. At this stage, she stops mirroring consciously. Her emotional reactions begin shaping themselves automatically around you. When you are calm, she calms. When you withdraw, she destabilizes. When you reappear, she feels relief. You have become the emotional regulator. Not by force, not by demand, but by presence and absence. The loss of internal reference. Slowly, her internal compass weakens. She stops trusting her initial reactions. She second-guesses herself. She looks to you, consciously or not, for emotional grounding. What would he think? How would he react? What does this mean to him? These questions begin guiding decisions that have nothing to do with you on the surface. That is when attachment crosses into dependency. Emotional fatigue disguised as depth. She begins feeling emotionally tired, but interprets it as intensity. Confusion feels meaningful. Uncertainty feels profound. Discomfort feels like growth. She believes that feeling this much must mean something important is happening. Very few people realize that emotional exhaustion can masquerade as emotional depth. The silent comparison effect. Other men begin to feel flat. They are clear. They are available. They are predictable. And predictability now feels empty. You are not better. You are unresolved. And unresolved stimuli dominate attention far longer than resolved ones. When doubt appears, at some point she wonders if something is wrong. She senses imbalance. She feels overinvested. But doubt does not free her. It traps her further. If this wasn't real, it wouldn't affect me like this. If this wasn't important, I wouldn't feel so confused. She uses the intensity as proof of significance. Emotional self-justification. She begins justifying internally, explaining your behavior to herself, defending your absence. minimizing her own discomfort. Once a person starts protecting the source of their emotional uncertainty, detached places reality. At a certain point, the image she carries of you no longer resembles a real person. It becomes a construction, an emotional artifact assembled from fragments, silences, impressions, and imagined meaning. This is not love. This is idealization. Idealization forms when access is limited and information is incomplete. The mind fills gaps with fantasy, and fantasy is always more seductive than truth. Your restraint becomes wisdom. Your silence becomes depth. Your distance becomes mystery. She stops seeing contradictions as flaws. She reframes them as complexity. Every inconsistency becomes proof that you are layered, nuanced, difficult to understand, therefore valuable. And because this version of you exists largely in her imagination, it cannot be challenged by reality. Projection reaches its peak. She begins placing her own inner world onto you. Her unmet needs. Her longing for recognition. Her desire for emotional intensity. She believes you share her inner language because she feels emotionally activated around you. Feeling becomes evidence. She assumes alignment without confirmation. She assumes intention without declaration. She assumes depth without proof. Projection replaces interaction. The emotional mirror breaks. Earlier you mirrored inversely. Now mirroring collapses entirely. Her emotions no longer respond to what you do. They respond to what she imagines you might do. A pause becomes meaning. A delay becomes signal. A neutral sentence becomes loaded with implication. Reality loses authority. Interpretation takes over. Emotional collapse disguised as connection. The intensity becomes unsustainable. She feels restless, distracted, emotionally overloaded. But she interprets this as connection becoming deeper, not as imbalance forming. Discomfort feels meaningful. Confusion feels profound. She believes that something this intense must be important. Cognitive narrowing. Her focus tightens. Other aspects of life fade slightly. Tasks feel dull. Conversations feel shallow. Not because you are extraordinary, but because emotional energy has been centralized. Centralization creates dependency. The illusion of emotional inevitability. She begins believing that what is happening cannot be random. It wouldn't feel like this if it wasn't meant to. There must be a reason. The mind seeks justification for emotional cost. And the easiest justification is meaning. Meaning protects investment. When emotional control becomes internal, you no longer need to guide the dynamic. She guides herself. She monitors her behavior, adjusts her tone, times her responses. She anticipates how things will feel if you react a certain way. You have been internalized. The paradox of awareness. She senses something is off. She feels the imbalance. But awareness does not break the attachment. Awareness increases it. If I'm this affected, it must be real. If it wasn't significant, I wouldn't be thinking about it this much. She uses intensity as evidence. Emotional self-betrayal. She begins overriding instincts that would normally protect her. Discomfort becomes acceptable. Waiting becomes normal. Uncertainty becomes tolerable. She rationalizes what she would reject elsewhere. This is not weakness. This is cognitive adaptation under emotional pressure. The collapse of comparison. Other connections fail to register. They feel too simple, too available, too clear. Clarity now feels empty. You are not superior. You are unresolved. And unresolved stimuli dominate attention. When she tries to confront the truth, occasionally clarity threatens to break through. She considers stepping back, detaching, creating distance. But the moment she does, emotional memory activates. Phrase you said, a look you gave, a moment that felt different. Memory reopens the loop. The internal conflict. She feels torn between logic and feeling. Logic warns her. Feeling pulls her back. And because feelings are immediate while logic is delayed, feeling wins. Emotional surrender without declaration. She never says she is surrendering. She simply stops resisting. She accepts the uncertainty, accepts the imbalance, accepts the waiting. Acceptance locks the structure in place. The cost of idealization. Idealization always carries a hidden cost, because the ideal cannot be satisfied. It cannot be reached. It cannot be resolved. She chases something that does not exist as a stable form. And yet she cannot stop. You as an internal standard. You become the reference. How others feel compared to you. How experiences measure against you. How emotions register next to you. Nothing matches. Not because you are perfect, but because you are undefined. The final shift before dependency. She no longer asks what you want. She asks what she needs to do to maintain the connection. That question marks the collapse of equality. The dynamic is no longer relational. It is psychological. At the deepest stage, control no longer looks like control. There are no demands, no rules, no visible constraints. Everything feels voluntary, and that is precisely why it works. She does not feel trapped. She feels choosing. This is the final illusion. You never told her what to do. You never restricted her actions. You never forced emotional decisions. You only shaped the emotional environment. And inside that environment, every choice she makes feels self-directed. Yet every path leads back to you. Emotional internalization. By now, your presence no longer depends on interaction. She carries you internally. Your reactions exist in her imagination. Your judgments echo in her decisions. Your silence speaks louder than any message. She asks herself questions before acting. How would he read this? What would this change between us? Would this pull him closer or push him away? These questions guide behavior more effectively than any command ever could. You are no longer external influence. You are internal structure. The disappearance of resistance. Resistance fades quietly. Not with a dramatic collapse. Not with surrender. But with exhaustion. The emotional effort of questioning, analyzing, resisting, and recalibrating becomes too heavy. So she stops. Not because she understands, but because understanding no longer matters. What matters is emotional continuity. The false peace of acceptance. She tells herself, this is just how it is. Not everything needs definition. Some things are intense by nature. Acceptance feels calming, but it is not freedom. It is adaptation. The nervous system settles into imbalance and mistakes it for stability. The final inversion. At the beginning, you influenced her emotions. Now, her emotions preserve your position. She avoids actions that might disturb the connection. She withholds honesty that might change the dynamic. She delays decisions that might force clarity. Not because you asked, because she fears emotional rupture. You no longer need to do anything. The silent dependency. She does not say she needs you. She does not ask for reassurance. But her emotional regulation depends on you. Your presence steadies her. Your absence destabilizes her. This is dependency without admission. The tragedy beneath dominance. And here lies the truth most never see. This dynamic does not create power without cost. Because while she becomes emotionally entangled, you become emotionally isolated. To maintain mystery, you must withhold. To maintain control, you must distance. To remain unreadable, you must never fully enter. You dominate the emotional field, but you never truly connect. The paradox of control. You become the center of her emotional gravity, but you are never held. She reaches. You retreat. She imagines depth. You guard emptiness. Control becomes armor. And armor blocks intimacy. When she finally sees the pattern, eventually, sometimes years later, clarity arrives. Not all at once. Not dramatically. But in fragments. She realizes she was chasing a feeling, not a person. She sees how uncertainty replaced connection, how intensity replaced intimacy, how imagination replaced reality. The realization hurts, but it also frees. And what remains? She walks away altered, more cautious, more guarded, more aware of emotional manipulation. And you? You remain unchanged on the surface. But internally something hardens. Because absolute control requires emotional distance. And emotional distance, repeated long enough, becomes identity. The final truth of dark psychology. Dark psychology does not create winners. It creates survivors. One survives confusion. The other survives emptiness. No one leaves untouched. No one leaves innocent. The closing realization. She believed she lost herself trying to reach you. You believed you mastered her emotions. But the deeper truth is this. She lost herself in the illusion of depth. You lost yourself in the fear of being seen. And that is why this dynamic always ends the same way. With silence. Not the seductive silence of mystery, but the quiet silence of something that was never real enough to last.